Good morning, everybody.
See, we're on time.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Hanukkah.
And
You
to
too.
you.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together, and then we will get right into it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So let me start with a general kind of question. I was at Minyan last night, and one of the members of our class said, I see that you love this book. I don't love it. She's so negative, etc. I wanted to just touch base with you as we're nearing the end of the book. And I wanted to get people's opinions. I mean, I have many answers to that question. It is obviously a negative. There's a lot of negative energy in the book, because she's capturing a negative energy phenomenon like anti-Semitism throughout the world. But I wanted to just check in. How are you guys liking the book in this late season of the book before we'll wrap it up next week? Barbara Resnick.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought you were taking hands. I like it a lot. I think it's a great wake-up call to many of us that we sometimes just overlook a lot of things that are real. And so I think it's a great wake-up call, and she doesn't mince her words.
Thank you, Barbara. Other folks who anybody want to comment on if you like the book, if you don't like the book, if you have strong thoughts in either direction, we'd love to hear it. Maddie Donna.
I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. I was just trying to get the volume up.
Okay. So I will pick up. First, I want to thank our host today, which is Sean Sanders. Sean, thank you so much for hosting this morning. We're grateful for your help here. Let's start. So we have two pieces of work today. Chapter 9, which is about the Jews of Morocco, Libya, Tunisia, Egypt. We actually all know somebody who is whose story is reflected in this. Our member Denise Telio was born and raised in Egypt, and her family was kicked out of Egypt. And so she tells this story. And I wanted to this chapter 9. I wanted to get some thinking from you about the this story, this chapter 9, and she tells it through a particular angle, which is that there are no Jews in these lands, and in many of these lands, it's not even
Recording in progress.
If you guys can all turn off your system, if you can all mute, so that we won't have that. And she describes how it's actually not safe for Jews to go into this land. If you read the chapter, she tells a story, for example, of a Jew who goes back to Tripoli after Gaddafi is ousted, and he's hounded out by an angry mob that says no Jews in Libya, not even one. So it's really not safe. And so she tells the story of how we're able to even retell the story that once there were Jews in these lands online and through this website. How many of you checked out the website Diarna to just see what it is, right? So you can go onto this website called Diarna, and it will tell you the story of a synagogue a synagogue that once stood. We'll tell you the story of a Jewish community that once existed that no longer exists. So I wanted to just get some preliminary thinking on this chapter. What did you think of this chapter? And how would you compare it in energy level and intensity level to the other chapters of the book? Anybody? I'll offer, let me just pick up with, I'll read this. I think I shared it in the letter that I sent out about it. But for example, I'm reading on page 177. Mapping sites in this environment, this Diarna website, can require enormous courage, not only because of instability and war, but because the hatred that prompted the Jews' flight has surreally outlived their departure. Libya is one of many places where Jews were violently rejected by their society. Tripoli was more than 25% Jewish before World War II. But in 1945, more than 100 Jews in the city were murdered and hundreds more wounded in massive pogroms, prompting the community's flight. Later, the dictator Muammar Gaddafi expelled all remaining Jews and confiscated their assets. In 2011, after Gaddafi's ouster, a single Libyan Jew who returned and attempted to remove trash from the wreckage of the city's Darbishi synagogue was hounded out of the country by angry mobs waving signs reading, "No Jews in Libya." Apparently, one was too many. And then she tells the story of how, given that reality, you can't just go to Libya, you can't just go to Tripoli, you can't just go to the synagogue and take pictures, how it was like a James Bond thing for people to even be able to recreate the story. And then if you go onto the Diarna website, you'll see magically from all this courageous James Bond work that they were able to recreate the Tripoli synagogue. And so it goes in Morocco, and so it goes in Iraq, and so it goes in Iran, and so it goes in a lot of North African communities, Muslim communities, Arab communities, where Jews once were kicked out, and now all that we have left is a website. My question to you is, how did you engage that chapter? Is that worth your time to hear that story? What does that say to us today? And so Dottie, great to see you, and please unmute. Dottie, you're muted. Please unmute. Sean, can you unmute Dottie, please? Dottie Sternberg.
Join meeting. I'm
Okay,
here.
now you're unmuted. Yes.
Yep, I-
Yeah, now you can speak.
I'll
Dottie,
st-
yeah.
you want- What did not surprise me about all these horrific expulsion of Jews, murdering of Jews, many years ago, I was in the Prague, and her title, "People Love Dead Jews," it hit me when I remembered I was there. All the Jews in Prague were put into labor camps. When I was in Prague, there were no Jewish citizens, they were out. But yet, the tour showed you the Jewish museum, the Jewish temple, with the Bima, where the Torah was kept. And there was so much about Jews, but there were no Jews there. So that title, "People Love Dead Jews," is true. It's sort of hard to explain, but that's what it is. They love dead Jews. There is money to be made. Here is the country, Czechoslovakia, Prague. There were no Jews. Now I don't know. This is maybe 20 years ago.
Where?
Right.
In Prague.
Have you been to Prague?
I have not. But anyway, yeah, Dottie, so that's her point. And that was chapter 2 was about Harbin, and she talks about the phenomenon of Jewish heritage sites. That's a euphemism, where the country kills its Jews, massacres its Jews, or expels its Jews. And then in order to make money, they take the synagogue that used to be, or the cemetery that used to be, they'll make it a Jewish heritage site. They will then recreate it or remodel it so that fresh Jewish money from Newton, Massachusetts comes in, and you spend your dollars in Prague. And the one part of the story they never tell you is, by the way, whatever happened to those Jews? Why did the Jews leave? And the part of the story they don't tell you is the Jews were killed and massacred and expelled. Now, in chapter 9 that we're reading, it's that same story, except for they don't have Jewish heritage sites. There's no Jews. It's not safe to even, like in Prague, presumably you could go to Prague without taking your life in your hands, but you can't go to Tripoli without taking your life in your hands. So now this is one step removed. This is now we're going to show you Jewish heritage sites, not in person like the Prague place, the synagogue that you mentioned, Dottie, but online. The only way you can get to any of these places where Jews used to live is online, because the hatred for Jews outlasted the existence of Jews. That's chapter 9. Wendy Landon, please unmute.
Okay, it kind of reminded me, I took it as saying we always have to remember, almost like when we recite the Passover story, as if we had been there. And so there are all these places in the world where Jews have been, and we can't forget the travels, the travails, the hardships that we've endured. I do want to say, in answer to your first question, how we like this book, like is not a good word. I find it provocative. I find it thought-provoking. I find at times, I think her worldview is maybe narrow for the evolution of Jewish people.
What do you mean by narrow for the evolution of the Jewish people? What do you mean by that, Wendy?
Meaning that I feel like in today's world, obviously Jewish people have been persecuted. I think within our own country, we're being persecuted again, and the risks are heightened to a degree that in 56 years, I've never quite felt it like this before. But yet I think that there are so many other people in our situation, and I look at relative strengths of the Jewish people with Israel that haven't been there before, that I think there needs to be a balance of understanding our risks, but also celebrating things, strength that we've gained. And I feel like there's not the counterbalance of saying, yes, we have suffered, we continue to suffer, but yet if you look at it, if you look at our plate in a 21st century world context, there are some more give and takes than there were in the 100 years ago.
If I hear what you're saying, Wendy, your critique is that where's the hope? Where's the hatikva? There's a lot of, she shares the darkness, but where does she also share the light and the hope? And that was Abe Foxman's critique, that he doesn't disagree with anything that she writes, but where's the hope, etc., the conclusions. Now, I just wanted to also engage this point that you made. So she tells the story of these Jewish communities. I think she writes, it was a very large number, maybe, what was the number? 1 million people that used to live in Arab lands, in Muslim lands, that were kicked out. And the question is, so let me just see this. Jews have lived throughout the Middle East and North Africa for thousands of years, often in communities that long predated Islamic conquest, but during the mid-20th century's tumultuous power shifts in the region between colonial and post-colonial control, political instability and anti-Semitic violence intensified to create a vast exodus, driving nearly 1 million Jews to emigrate to Israel and elsewhere, leaving entire countries all but devoid of Jews, and leaving behind synagogues, schools, and cemeteries that served those communities for generations. And because surreally, the hatred for Jews survived the exodus of Jews, you can't go back there again to see them. And therefore, the only way is online. So now my question to you is what's the relevance of that story? What's the importance of that story? Or is it relevant, or is it important? So 1 million Jews used to live in Tripoli in North Africa, and they don't, now they live in Israel. So what? Why tell that story? That's one of the questions that is implicit in this. Judy Swartz, why tell that story?
Because I think all these communities where Jews live, they made all kinds of contributions. They had beautiful cultural, artistic things and what have you. And yeah, we do need to know the history, why some of them left. I mean, some of them left voluntarily, and sometimes, quite obviously, the kings or something changed, and the state of Israel brought about all kinds of things. But to not know the history is a rich, beautiful culture. Somewhere she says ISIS wants to make the group is hell-bent on wiping out minorities. We want to remember the history of where we lived and were loved and contributed. And there were obvious reasons what we contributed when you go back into history of England and France and so forth. And now you get into the Middle East and all that kind of stuff. It's, if you're proud of peoplehood, you want to know all the richness. You don't not want to know. That would be, to me, horrendous. It's like sweeping it under the carpet. No, you want to know all the richness. It adds to who you are.
Thank you, Judy. So I would say, I mean, I agree with you. I thought chapter 9 was just a very important chapter for that reason, because, you know, almost 1 million Jews did lose their communities and their lives in their old communities before they got kicked out. And because it's such an unsafe space for Jews, it's different from Prague. Europe is a graveyard for Jews. We know this. And Prague and Eastern Europe is especially a graveyard for Jews. And we know this. But you could still go to Prague, you know, March of the Living still goes to Auschwitz in Germany and Poland, and they welcome our dollars, and you can come and go without dying in Poland or Germany. You can't do that necessarily in Tripoli or these countries in North Africa and the Middle East where there are no longer Jews. And therefore, it's very easy to imagine that whole story going away. So I think that this story is really crucial, just as Judy, as you said, to preserve the story. Also, another reason, which is if you talk to your kids who are in college, or if you talk to your grandkids who are in college, it is axiomatic on college campuses, axiomatic, that Israel is a white colonial enterprise.
Yeah.
We stole the land of people of color, and we stole the land of an indigenous people. And Israel is a colonial enterprise. And that's obviously factually not true, right, for many reasons. But one of the reasons is that the Jews who were indigenous to all these other places got kicked out because they were Jewish. And that's a part of the story that is never told, that I think chapter 9 preserves. The Jews of Libya and North Africa and Tunisia and all those places got kicked out. They were native to that land for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and they went to Israel. That's a part of the story that your grandkids at Oberlin or your grandkids at Berkeley, your grandkids at any college campus in this country will never, ever hear. But it's true and it's important. Barbara Resnick.
I just want to say two things quickly. Frank had a cousin in Israel whose husband came from Iraq. And his parents suffered to get to Iraq. They were school teachers, but when they got to Israel, they were not thought of as very, very much. But that's a different story. The other thing is I was in Morocco on a bike trip. I was with a non-Jewish group.
Can people who are not speaking please mute? Sean, if you can mute everybody who is not speaking. Thank you, Sean. Yes, Barbara?
Anyway, I was in Morocco and I was with a non-Jewish group, and we were taking a tour of, I forget right now where some famous singer was. And the guide said, oh, here's the synagogue. And I have a book where someone wrote a book, Rosa, about being Jewish in Morocco and how wonderful it was. And then another tour guide said, the Jews left because they wanted to go to Israel where they could make more money, or they were cabinet posts here. And we're very proud of the Jewish community there. And yet it had a mixed heritage. So it's safe to go to Morocco, and they're always doing things on religions and different religions. It's always in the newspaper. But actually, people fled Morocco. They thought it was dangerous.
Right. Absolutely. Good. Any last comments on this chapter? I'd be interested for any of you who went onto the website, as I did, the ARNA, and you looked at synagogues that Jews used to live in that you cannot go to now, Many of these synagogues, by the way, were repositories for garbage, like they were garbage heaps. So imagine the Rabbi Simon Chill Sanctuary, if God forbid we were kicked out of Newton, and the building is 385 is still here, but it's kind of an abandoned site and it becomes a trash heap. That's what happened in synagogue after synagogue. And I'm interested if any of you actually spent the time going through the website and looking at gorgeous synagogues, historic synagogues that are now trash heaps, and how that made you feel. Paul Kalis.
Yes, I want to say from the beginning that my overall feeling about the book is one of depression. I find to say you'll like this book or not like this book it doesn't mean anything to me. I just found that it pushed me down a level that at this stage of the game, we even have to read things like this. Now, I went to the website and I was amazed at how much work these people were doing in order to restore some memory of what was there. And if you know, I'd like to know who some of these people are and why we as a Jewish community, or me as part of a Jewish community, have never heard of Diana.
Right. All I know about Diana is what's written in this book, Paul. And that's why I think this book, I'm not saying that if you're going on a vacation to Hilton Head and you want to chill out and lose yourself in a lovely escape book for a week, take People Love Dead Jews. I'm not saying it's an easy book. I'm not saying it's a happy book. I'm not saying it's a fun book. I am saying it's an important book.
Yes.
That tells us hard facts about the Jewish story that I at least never knew. Like I know Denise Telio from our synagogue. I kind of know that there are Jews from Morocco and Africa and Egypt that got kicked out. I kind of knew that, but I didn't kind of get the whole fullness of the story. I didn't get what that meant. I never really double clicked on that to think about what happened to the synagogue in a community where Jews used to live, etc. And so this chapter and this book brings those very sober truths to bear. Wendy Landon's point, Dave Foxham's point, everybody's point. So you don't want to be depressed. You don't want this book to lead you down a rat hole of depression, a rabbit hole of depression. The question is, how can you, there's a sweet spot. You could ignore the history and just be happy. You could go down a rabbit hole of emerging with a complex that everybody's always going to hate us, and therefore you just live a very insular life. I think both of those extremes, ignoring our history or being turned into a rabbit hole from our history, are not good extremes. The question is, how can we know our history and acknowledge our history, be inspired by our history to work for a better world? That's the move of this book, I think. But you're right. I mean, these chapters are depressing. They're very depressing. But the question is, how do you not end there? How does that prompt you to a better place? Anyone else want to just talk about the experience of looking through these stories of synagogues in other communities that are no more? David Copeland. And David, you're muted.
I think it's a very important book to read, and for one reason, or a number of reasons. One of the reasons is it gives lie to this so-called sympathy for the plight of the Palestinians, who claim that 600,000 were removed from Israel, allegedly forced out of Israel, and they're refugees. They're kept by UNRWA in these camps forever and ever, 50, 60 years. No mention is made of the 800,000 plus Jews that were driven out of Arab countries. The world ignores that fact, and that Israel absorbed these, and yet the Arab countries have continually refused to absorb their Arab refugees. It's kind of an important aspect, I think, to promulgate. The other thing I think about the book is I once read an article, Can There Be Anti-Semitism with No Jews? And I think they were talking about Poland. and Poland has very few Jews left. Even the Jews who survived the Holocaust that managed to make their way back to Poland were axed to death when they tried to reclaim their property. And yet Poland continues to have severe strains of anti-Semitism, to the
Right.
point where the legislature has passed legislation saying that it is a crime to suggest that Poland had any integral part in the Holocaust, that they were the victims of the Nazis. They weren't the persecutors of the Jews. One big lie.
Right. Thank you,
I
David.
don't know, but not only that, but then they have Jewish festivals with Jewish music as if Jews were really alive when they're not, which
Right.
is a total oxymoron.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. So that is the Jews of the desert, the Jews in places that don't exist that you can only find online. Then the second part of our reading was about this the Auschwitz exhibit. How many of you ever saw the exhibit about human bodies? Did you ever see that? And she points out that the people who brought us this Auschwitz exhibit were the same people. It's a for-profit company that brought the human bodies, and then she describes the exhibit, the Auschwitz exhibition, and then she talks about how it made her felt. And I'm interested in your reaction to this chapter. It's a chapter, it's an unusual chapter. It's a chapter about how she felt going to the Auschwitz exhibition, which, by the way, she credits with being basically an excellent exhibition, that they got, they got a lot of details just right, if you know the chapter. So I'd love to hear, so I'd love to hear your reactions to this chapter. Anyone want to share? I'd love some voices of folks who haven't spoken, who would like to offer your voices. What did you think of this chapter about her going to the Auschwitz exhibit? Debbie Ginsburg.
I want to talk not about this chapter, but it reminded me of a book that our Hadassah book group read by Kristen Hamill in the last year. Her books are always on the Jewish bestseller list. She's not Jewish, but she always writes about World War II. And I think they're very formulaic books. It's about a harrowing escape, and there's a hero, a heroine, and a happy ending. That, that person is saved, of course, and has saved a lot of Jews in Nazi Germany or elsewhere. And it's very exploitative, like this, Dara Horn feels about this exhibit in New York City. And it's amazing to me that so many bestsellers, whether it be on the Jewish bestseller list or the New York Times, have to do with World War II and Jews. It's there's millions to be made when you have a best-selling book, and this woman has capitalized on a best-selling trend.
Yes. So I'm not familiar with that book, Debbie. I don't hear that critique in Dara Horn's reaction to the exhibit about Auschwitz. I don't feel that she felt that it was manipulative. In fact, the paradox of her chapter is, she does say it was a for-profit organization that brought it, but she basically, the paradox of this chapter is the paragraph after paragraph, she says they got it right. It was excellent. They got a lot of details right. It was excellent. It was as one would expect. It was correct. It was good. It was, and also that it was searing to go through. That, as she describes in detail the hours that she spent going there, and it was draining, and it was not Disney World. It was very real. But her, despite the fact that they got it right, and that it responds to a problem, which is a lot of people don't know about the Holocaust. So it ameliorates that problem. And it's crowded, and a lot of people, there's energy around Auschwitz, and there's people waiting in line to go take in an Auschwitz exhibit. And so in a sense, it's fulfilling its educational mission. that all those people waiting in line are going to now see an excellent exhibit about Auschwitz education. That should be a good thing. And yet she leaves the excellent exhibit, well attended, that's educating people about Auschwitz. She leaves pretty broken hearted. And what she says is that the perverse use of the Holocaust now is if something is not the Holocaust, it's no big deal. So and therefore it minimizes the things that are actually happening in our own time. So I'm just going to read this because she talks about everyone must learn about the Holocaust so as not to repeat it. I'm reading from page 187. But this has come to mean that anything short of the Holocaust is, well, not the Holocaust. The bar is rather high. Then she says, shooting people in a synagogue in San Diego or Pittsburgh isn't systemic. It's the act of a lone wolf, and it's not the Holocaust. The same is true for arson attacks against 2 different Boston area synagogues, followed by similar simultaneous attacks on Jewish institutions in Chicago a few days later, along with physical assault on religious Jews on the streets of New York, all of which happened within a week of my visit to the Auschwitz show. Lobbing missiles at sleeping children in Israel's Kiryat Gat, where my husband's cousin spent the week of my museum visit, dragging their kids to bomb shelters, isn't an attempt to bring death to the Jews, no matter how frequently the people lobbying the missiles broadcast those very words. The wily Jews there figured out how to prevent their children from dying in large piles, so it clearly is no big deal. Doxing Jewish journalists is definitely not the Holocaust. Harassing Jewish college students is also not the Holocaust. Trolling Jews on social media is not the Holocaust either. Now, and then she goes on to say, even hounding Jewish communities out of entire countries and seizing all their assets, which happened in a dozen Muslim nations whose Jewish communities predated the Islamic conquest, countries that are now almost all entirely Yud and Rhine, is emphatically not the Holocaust. It's quite amazing how many things are not the Holocaust. So here's my question. Do you find that unusually bitter? That's just acrid, that's just bitter, that's just this woman should get a life? Or do you think she's got a legitimate point? That paradoxically, the Holocaust is used to minimize acts of anti-Semitism that are not the Holocaust. What do you think of that point? Is it too bitter or is it kind of on point? David Copeland and then Wendy.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. I think these acts like the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh and the raid on the San Diego Jewish communities, temples, and Jewish day schools are the way the Holocaust began. The Holocaust began with small steps, confiscating Jewish property, ultimately culminating in Kristallnacht, and ultimately the Holocaust. So these small steps have to be extinguished. These are small fires that need to be extinguished immediately because they can lead to the Holocaust.
Right, Dave, by the way, just so we're clear, she doesn't think that they're not big deals. She thinks they're very big deals. But what she's arguing is that in our society as a whole, because they're not at the Holocaust, that it's not a big deal. When she says it's no big deal, she's not channeling her own voice. Her own voice is to the contrary. When she says it's no big deal, she's saying that's going to be the voice that minimizes routine anti-Semitism. And she thinks that's very dangerous. That's the entire point of this chapter.
I understand that. I know she's not saying that it's not, that she's not minimizing those acts. But what I'm saying is that if those people who say, well, it's not the Holocaust, it's not so bad, have to understand that small steps lead to big steps. And I think it's important to address them immediately and extinguish them as best we can, because they do lead to a Holocaust. They can lead to it.
Right. That's the point of this chapter. That's the point of this chapter. But you have to deal with the paradox that actually, and my question is she accurate or not accurate? That actually going to the Auschwitz exhibition in New York which shows in such horrific detail the unimaginable world of Auschwitz, then when you come out and you hear that, oh, a couple of Jews got beat up on the streets, well, that's a lone wolf. That's not a systemic. That's not Hitler. That's not 1930s Germany. And so she's naming a problem, and I'm asking if you agree with the problem she's naming. That paradoxically, Holocaust education serves to normalize quote unquote routine anti-Semitism. And that's exactly the point of this whole chapter. Wendy Landon.
And I agree that, and I think she says it exactly. It sets the bar for people that the Holocaust is anti-Semitism, but this other stuff, to
It's
the
a lone
larger
wolf.
groups, doesn't
A
quite,
lone wolf.
right.
Yeah.
My question to you, on page 190 and 191, I was reading and I'm like, oh, right on. And then I'm curious how you read this. And it starts out that the Holocaust at the bottom of 190 drives home the importance of love is an idea, like the idea that Holocaust education prevents anti-Semitism, that seems entirely unobjectionable. It is entirely objectionable. The Holocaust didn't happen because of a lack of love. It happened because entire societies abdicated responsibility for their own problems. And I'm reading this, I'm like, right on, right on. And then it made me pause. And I'm curious what you think, Wes. And instead blame them on the people who have always represented since they first introduced the idea of commandedness to the world, the thing they were most afraid of, responsibility. And so my question here is, how do you read that?
I thought it was exactly on point. I mean, the Jews are, I mean, the notion that it's tempting to come up with a "We Are the World" songfest with Bruce Springsteen and 50 cool artists singing "We Need to Love Each Other," and that's the lesson from the Holocaust. And she is making the point that that's appalling and anathema, and does a travesty to the 6 million, because it was not lack of love that resulted in Auschwitz. It was the scapegoating of a people. I mean, this was, Hitler and the Nazis blamed Jews for the knife in the back. That was I don't know how you say that in German, but the translation of the German is Jews did a knife in the back of Germany during World War I, and that's why they lost. And literally Germany blamed Jews for the loss in World War I, blamed Jews for the economy, etc. And we were an easy scapegoat. That was not lack of love. That was being scapegoated and their failure to deal with their own issues. So I thought it was touche. I thought it was exactly on point. But it raises the issue. Here's the problem with this book, to my mind. And I'd love more voices. The problem with this book is not that it's inaccurate. It's exactly accurate. The problem with the book is that accurate is depressing, and accurate is really sad. And you don't want a book that's gonna end you up in a rabbit hole of depression, to use Paul Kalis's story about being depressed. So the question is, how can you face it? But I think on the 189, 190, 191 that you bring up, Wendy, when she says it's very objectionable to say that the lesson of the Holocaust is about love, she's 100% right. The lesson of the Holocaust is about hate and abdication of responsibility, and it's about scapegoating.
My question is, and is she saying, and scapegoating, that's when I was right on. And then is she saying that Jews represent responsibility and that's why we were scapegoating? That was my question. Or am I reading it wrong? That's how I read it, but I might have been like, is she saying that Jews represent responsibility above other peoples? Did I read it?
She does seem to be saying that. I read that. I just took her to mean that Jews got scapegoated for Germans' problems, and that's why it happened. By the way, in Exodus, when the Pharaoh says there's a people not like us and they're not going to be loyal. And Haman does it in Megillat Esther. It's always the same line that Jews are a foreign element. They can't be trusted and they're the source of our problems. So I think that's what I resonated from it. What resonated from this for me. The part about that they represent the thing about responsibility, I interpret her to mean that I'm going to avoid responsibility for my problems by blaming somebody else.
Okay, good.
That's what I took from that.
That was my question.
I want to just solicit those who feel like, why are we reading this darn book? This book is just such a slog and it's just negative energy. I want to really invite that voice to be considered. And so anyone who wants to make that case that this book is actually not so helpful, I'd love to invite that. And then when we're done with that piece, I want to connect this to the fact that we are on the second day of Hanukkah. And I want to bring to you something that is an interesting quirk of the day that only now did I understand because of this book. But anybody want to talk about reservations, concerns about this book? And I'm gonna, please, Paul Kalis. And okay, great.
Yes, I don't have reservations about reading the book. I do question who is reading the book. If only Jews are reading this book, that just increases our feeling of, let's say, anxiety. But a book like this, to be effective and change things, has to be read by other people who are not Jewish. And I don't know if the publishers of this book are going after the correct audience.
That's such an excellent point, Paul. You know, what I was thinking about when you said that, the association it made for me is that I think her name is Michelle Alexander, who wrote The New Jim Crow. And she does an interpretation of US history that goes from slavery to Jim Crow laws to lynching to mass incarceration as the new Jim Crow. I read the book and I found it very persuasive, very compelling. But that book did not achieve its mission until it was read by a wider audience. If only people of color read The New Jim Crow, then it's not having the impact it could have. But when college professors throughout America started assigning it to white students, The New Jim Crow, then my kids would come home and say, "Oh my God, Dad, did you know? Have you read? You've got to read." Two of my three kids brought The New Jim Crow home and plopped it on my desk and said, "You have to read this." And it's when white kids started reading it and talking to it about their white parents that it started changing minds. And I think that a similar thing is true with this book. I couldn't agree with you more. So we'll see if that happens. As you know, it just came out in September, so it's pretty new. Zelda.
Yes, to that point, I did see the chapter the first chapter we read today about the Middle East was published in the Atlantic just this month, I think it was, or last month. And I thought that was very interesting because, and I wondered, if they chose that chapter to publish. I'm not sure exactly why, but that perhaps it was just that it would resonate more with people in general to read something like that,
Right.
than one of the more serious ones in the sense.
Yeah. I think the mainstreaming of this book is very important. I think we can all, whatever you think about the book, we can all agree that we don't want to end in depression. We want to end in increased resolve to build a better society. And so one of the ways that that could happen is if more people face the brutal realities that she described in this book. Anyone else who hasn't spoken yet would like to speak about pro or con, but especially con on this book? One of the challenges with Zoom is that I fear that I miss people. So Bruce Donoff.
I have to say is negative, but it could be positive.
1 second, 1 second. Okay, there you go.
Thank you. You hear me all right? Yes.
I sure can, yes.
Why do we all remember November 23rd, 1963, the day that JFK was shot? Why do we remember 9/11? Why do most of us will remember January 6th? I was in Pittsburgh the day after this happened for a meeting. You would never know anything happened there. And I think that's the kind of, I think notoriety is the wrong word, but that's the kind of effort to promote this kind of behavior that becomes more important and can make this book more important.
In other words, just again, mainstreaming the book and having more people read it and teach it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a problem in this country.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the world.
I think the new Jim Crow and Caste are required reading for all of our children. By all of our children, I mean all American children should read the new Jim Crow and Caste, and they should also read People Love Dead Jews. And particularly, you know, the woke left that hates Israel, the woke left that thinks that Jews are colonizers, the woke left needs to read this book. They need to read this book. I couldn't agree with you anymore. I wanna use the remaining time about an aspect of Hanukkah. I'll be very curious to see what you think about this. Here's a simple question. What is Ma'oz Tzur about? You know, you've lit the candles, and it's kind of the go-to song. Most of us don't know the whole thing, and you know that I can't sing anyway, and especially on Zoom I can't sing. But we all know the first couple of lines of Ma'oz Tzur, and it's a nice tune, and we sing it, and then we, you know, eat dinner. So here's my question. What is Ma'oz Tzur about? Anyone have any ideas? And again, I'll go through the screen to see if I'm missing anybody. So I'm going to tell you a dirty little secret about Ma'oz Tzur, and I just discovered this yesterday. If you think People Love Dead Jews is depressing, what's even more depressing is Ma'oz Tzur. In fact, Ma'oz Tzur is so depressing that conservative movement prayer books will not translate it. So if you look at our daily Siddur, it's they do a paraphrase of a few lines, but ignore the rest of it. If you look at the Shabbat Siddur, they do a paraphrase of a few lines and then do not treat the rest of it. If you actually want to read Ma'oz Tzur, what it means, what it says, you have to go to an Orthodox Siddur. So for no extra dues, this just comes with your temple dues. I'm going to ask Sean Sanders now to please screen share Ma'oz Tzur that comes from the Orthodox Siddur art scroll. And if you can go a little bit down, keep going. Okay, so I'm just going to read it. And here is what Ma'oz Tzur actually says, the entire thing. And it is about, and it tells, this is, I'm going to use Paul's word again, it's depressing. And it tells the story of Jewish history. And it's a story of People Love Dead Jews. So I'll read, "O mighty rock of my salvation, to praise you is a delight. Restore my house of prayer. There we will bring a thanksgiving offering, when you will have prepared the slaughter for the blaspheming foe. Then I shall complete with the song of hymn, the dedication of the altar, right? So what we need is, we need Jerusalem rebuilt, we need our temple, and then we're gonna be in a place where we can deal with the slaughter of the blaspheming foe. That's just the outline, the frame. Now, Sean, if you can keep going, keep going now. Okay, now we get to the heart of, keep going. Okay, now, okay, troubles. Now here's the rest of it that nobody ever reads or translates. Troubles sated my soul, when with grief my strength was consumed. They had embittered my life with hardship, with the calf-like kingdom's bondage, but with his great power, he brought forth the treasured ones. Pharaoh's army and all his offspring went down like a stone into the deep. So we deal with the fact that people love dead Jews in Egypt. Okay, keep going. To the abode of his holiness he brought me, but there too I had no rest, and an oppressor came and exiled me. For I had served aliens and had drunk benumbing wine. Scarcely had I departed my land, when at Babylonia's demise Zerubbabel came. At the end of 70 years, I was saved. So that's the destruction of the first temple. Babylonians love dead Jews. Go down a little bit more, Sean. To sever the towering cypress sought the Agagite, son of Hammedatha, but it became a snare and a stumbling block to him, and his arrogance was stifled. The head of the Benjamite you lifted, and the enemy, his name you blotted out. His numerous progeny, his possessions on the gallows you hang. That is Persia loves dead Jews. That's the Haman story. Greeks gathered against me then in Hasmonean days. They breached the walls of my towers, and they defiled all the oils. And from the one remnant of the flask, a miracle was wrought for the roses. Men of insight 8 days established the song and jubilation. That's Greek anti-Semitism. Keep going. Then the end, bear your holy arm and hasten the end for salvation. Avenge the vengeance of your servant's blood from the wicked nation. For the triumph is too long delayed for us, and there is no end to days of evil. Repel the red one in the nethermost shadow and establish for us the 7 shepherds. And as the note here from the art scroll points out, this is from a prophecy of Micah that a kingdom is going to come to try to kill the Jews, and God is going to give us 7 shepherds to help us fight. So the end of this whole story, and now Sean, you can come back to the full screen. The entire song of Ma'os Sur is Jewish history is full of enemies and bloodshed. It actually thematically is just like what we talked about in the Netanyahu's book, B'chol dor v'dor omdim aleinu l'chalotenu v'hakadosh baruch hu matzilenu miyadam. In every generation, somebody comes to destroy us. And remember when we were studying the Netanyahu's, I showed you that picture from the Hartman Haggadah of all the enemies of Jewish history trying to destroy us. That's the Pesach story, and that is the Hanukkah story, and that's what we sing Ma'os Sur. Now, what do you make of the fact that I didn't even realize that, because I never really studied it until yesterday. So I've been doing 60 years of Hanukkah celebration and managed to just think it was a pleasant little ditty. Ma'os Sur Yeshuati, da 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 da. Past the latkes, past the chocolate, past the dreidel, happy kids. So we take a song that is about serious bloodstained history, and we don't translate it, and we don't think about what it means, and we put it in a context which is about light and hope. And I think in a very real way, that is exactly the tension with this whole book, which is the content of the song is you just heard it. It's deep and depressing, but we can't deal with depression. So our movement doesn't even translate it. You would never know unless you go to art school. And then when we do live it in our lived religious lives, it's very much like that Tom Cruise movie with Jack Nicholson. You can't handle the truth. We can't handle the truth. We just can't handle the truth. So we convert this bloody song into a pleasant ditty. And I think in a very real way, it kind of embodies the tensions of this book. It's sober, it's sad. We get allergic to too much depressing. We need hope. And so we convert it to a light and warmth and Hanukkah candle lighting song. I think Ma'os Sur is people love dead Jews as we actually experience the book with our yearning for hope. Judy Swartz.
Well, I I don't see this whole book as depressing. I see it as part of our history, and then I see where we are today. I also, that a small remnant of us survived, and then came the Zionist dream, and look what we did. And the fact is, we are alive today when all these other civilizations, Greek, Roman, Babylonian, Persian, blah, 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 are no longer here. We cannot deny that people have hated us and have forced us out, whether it was right or wrong. It has happened, but we have still survived. You look at all of European history. We survived. It's unbelievable. And that is a joyous, exciting thing. Now we get into Hanukkah, and the light should be an inner light. It's a pure spiritual thing that got tied into December, and it was supposed to be Sukkot, and we know all about that and what have you. And, you know, this Mishigas today, it has to be, you know, so our children shouldn't feel wrong. We should tell them exactly what it's all about, all right? And get them to understand we are a minority here, and this is not to be in place of Christmas. We need to get the truth out, and we need to be proud of who we are and talk the story of the Maccabees, and then talk what happened to them, and then talk the fact that we survived, and then get in the Zionism. That to me is very, very exciting.
Okay, Judy. Well, thank you. By the way, I think it's demonstrably true that all of us who are on this call are living in the best time in the history of the Jewish people. Because, and you know, Hartman and Micha's pointed this out, Danielle has pointed this out. The year 1900 was, you know, at the time, 1904, 1905, at the time of the Kishinev pogroms, there was no Israel, and the American Jewish community was weak, and anti-Semitism was very thick, and we didn't have the political clout to persuade FDR to do anything about the Holocaust. And we were, you know, that was the season where people were changing their names because they thought that a Jewish name wouldn't survive America. That was in 1900. And now in the year 2000 and 2021, there's a strong Israel. And while there is anti-Semitism, the American Jewish community is very strong. So an objective expert who looked at Jewish history would say that we're living in the most positive and powerful time in the history of our people. There's a strong Israel with a strong military. There's a strong American Jewish community. And both of those are absolutely true, as well as the fact that we, you know, concerns about anti-Semitism continue to also remain strong. So Judy, thank you for that note of hope. And I think the challenge of reading this book is to hold both of these tensions, the history that is hard, that is bloodstained, that is depressing, and the current events that are extremely concerning and not to be minimized, and also the hopeful trajectory that there is Israel, that Israel is strong, and there is an American Jewish community, and it has political power greater than it's ever had before. And to hold both of those at the same time, that is our move. And I think that's why we sing Ma'os Sur with a happy tune. So a happy and a healthy Hanukkah to everyone. And for next week, let's finish the book. We'll finish read the last few pages, the last few chapters, and we'll finish the book next week. Hanukkah Sameach, guys. Thank you so much.